I was a liberal Kantian without even knowing it growing up. I would read texts to kind of find the rules, the oughts of what I should do. I was very interested in sort of individualism to a extreme degree. Then I came to read these ancient texts when I was a young man, like the Apostolic Fathers or John Calvin and others, and I slowly began to have a change that was going on in me that began to make me ask questions about the why and what is really going on with reality. It made me more curious about the world. But it wasn't until I read Alasdair MacIntyre's After Virtue that I finally found the right language to describe what was happening in my mind. I was reading texts that existed in a world in which there was virtue and an agreed upon rational discourse. In short, I was reading about a world that no longer existed while living in the modern world. In this video, I want to articulate 5 big picture ideas that I learned from Alasdair MacIntyre, I guess throughout the last couple, decade or so, to help you understand not only what's going on for me, but I think probably what's going on for you. If you're someone who reads ancient texts and then lives in the modern world, things seem to be so different, and I want to help to explain why that is. So we'll be going over 1, the amnesia about the virtue tradition, 2, the incommensurability of rational discourse, the goodness of virtue, the purpose in all things or telos, and the freedom to be curious. And if you watch this video, you're going to come away understanding why, when you read ancient texts, they feel so strange and compared to the world that you live in today. First of all, amnesia about the virtue tradition. Alasdair MacIntyre opens his book After Virtue by giving a story. It says, imagine a world in which there was a catastrophe and the sciences were lost. But some fragments were found, words like neutron and atoms and so on, and people began to create a new physics, a new science. But it spawned in a world without Isaac Newton and all this kind of stuff, and it was rebuilt, but some of the language is the same, atoms, neutrons, but they connected to entirely different things, new people, new ideas, new concepts, etc. There was some overlap, of course, but it was strange. They were using some of the same language, but with completely different reference points, a new system of rationality. MacIntyre thinks the same thing more or less happened to us when it comes to moral things, when it comes to rational justification for life. There was a mostly unbroken tradition in the West, sort of Aristotelian tradition of metaphysics and of virtue that more or less, not that everyone agreed, that's of course they disagreed, but was sort of like the common way to measure what's right or wrong. And everyone knew that there were things like goodness to pursue and purpose and telos behind everything. And these sorts of ideas helped to create a rational structure that, yes, there was tons of disagreements, but it was the same sort of world in which you could disagree and perhaps find clarity or overcome your differences. This connects, secondly, to the incommensurability of rational discourse. By this, MacIntyre means that we don't have a standard anymore to compare. There's no commensurable standard to compare against. So in the ancient world, you had maybe this Aristotelian and later Thomistic way of rational discourse. And yes, you could disagree all the time, but at least there was some basic standard to which you could appeal to for what is and what is not. What ended up happening in the last few hundred years through the Enlightenment were a number of people who attempted to create their own kind of rational discourse that was clear and so on. But as they pursued this new thing, they created a bunch of other ones. There's those who are pragmatic, so kind of what works is the way to go. They're more of a Nietzschean view where all these values need to be reevaluated, and you have this sort of Ubermensch idea and so on. Maybe Humean views of evidence that is more like materialistic evidence, and it's not Hume per se himself, but the idea sort of eliminates ideas of like causes that are immaterial and so on. Well, what ends up happening then, we have a number of different groups of people that create their own rationalities, and we all live in this world together where we have different viewpoints and can't fully agree. One example would be, the pro-choice and pro-life movement. The pro-choice persons will say, well, pregnancy is a sort of clump of cells in my body. We're biologically aware of this now. And given that it's my body, it's sort of my choice what I do with it. Why would you try to control me? I'm essentially free, or yes, I have a liberty of choice. I'm a person, I have rights. You can't control my body. By analogy, if someone said they wanted to cut my mustache, I'd probably say, no, it's mine. I'm not going to let you do that. And they would say, well, your mustache is alive. I'd be like, only to the degree that it's me, and therefore I can kind of cut my hair, my mustache hair. On the other hand, those who are pro-life will say, we understand that there's something growing in these clump of cells are growing in your body, but we believe in the sacredness of life, that this is a human life that's within you and has the rights of any other person, and it's vulnerable and weak, and while it is certainly in your body, it's still a real human life. And for that reason, we don't want you to terminate that pregnancy. Now, it's interesting, these two points of views are based on kind of different reasoning principles. Usually, pro-life people have this principle that life is made and it has intrinsic value and worth and dignity. Sometimes there's religious reasons why. For this reason, those who are pro-life typically view life in the womb as we'd say sacred. On the other hand, if you're pro-choice, you may not have that point of view. You may not have that kind of big picture religious view, or if you do, it's still merely a mechanistic, materialistic clump of stuff in you, and it's really just you and it's your freedom. Well, everyone kind of knows that these two groups don't usually mix too well, and it's hard to persuade one another. And this is probably an example of the incommensurability of rational discourse that MacIntyre was talking about. But this happens everywhere and with everything, even though we sometimes pretend to have consensus. Well, third, MacIntyre opened me up to the goodness of virtue. This is something I knew, but didn't really have words to talk about. There are things that are real in this world. I, for example, believe in truth and justice and wisdom. These are real things. You can achieve truth. You can achieve justice. It gets harder and harder the more specific you are, I grant, in situations, but they're real. And they're good. And there are certain things in this life that you can truly gain. Virtue being one of them. It becomes who you are and can't be lost in that sense. You can lose clothes, money, status, whatever it is, but the thing that you really can't lose is the person that you become through virtue. And virtue is real. And MacIntyre opened me up to that world. Not that he necessarily convinced me of that, I think I already was, but he helped me to put language to this and made me study Plato and Aristotle to the point that I found them, Plato in particular, utterly persuasive in the reality of goodness and truth and justice. While I was never really a skeptic, it gave me the language for why I'm not a skeptic, why I can pursue truth. And fourth, connected to this is telos, or the purpose of all things. MacIntyre describes the old world in which everyone recognized not only was there goodness, but there was purpose, or telos. A watch was good because it told time. A watch was bad when it didn't tell time. A seed is good when it grows into a tree. A boy is good when he grows into a man. Everything has potential to become what it is made to be. Whereas today we kind of choose our own adventure. We say that we live our lives by preference and by choice, and we become who we want to be. MacIntyre calls this a motivism, this way of being in the world where essentially your preferences define right and wrong. About your life, about what you're going to do, about the kind of person you want to be. You're no longer created with potential that can be achieved through actualizing it. You no longer are a boy who becomes a man. You might decide to be whatever. You might um, choose who you want to be in a kind of extreme way. But the world in which most people used to live in was one full of purpose, natural purpose, tied to the nature of things. Whereas today, that's typically maybe assumed by some, but really unstated. And instead, we advocate things like you do you, or you find yourself, or you create your own meaning, all this sort of things. Well, that all sounds good and well until you get into the world of almost infinite choices, and you end up finding that life is overwhelming and difficult. What simplifies everything is knowing that goodness and truth and justice are real, that you have a purpose that is objective, known, and can be achieved. And to get that means that you will live a life that is well lived, and therefore you'll be considered happy, in this old sense of happy, this living a life well. Finally, fifth of all, was this freedom to be curious. And it's not so much that MacIntyre taught me the freedom to be curious, but his curiosity, his pursuit of these things, helped to foster something in me that I think has served me well and can serve you well. Namely, this kind of being unafraid of ideas. I remember listening to a podcast last night with John Lennox in it, and he said that his dad at 14 gave him a book, the Communist Manifesto, and he asked his dad why, and his dad said, well, you need to know what people think. And what a simple but refreshing idea. If you maybe watch some of my videos or my channel in general, you probably know that I have strong convictions on things. But largely, those are born out of this desire to know what people think, the desire to know what is versus what is not. And, well, I probably am imperfect, or I'm sure. I do genuinely seek to know what other people say that I disagree with. In fact, I think that can do two things. One, it can show you that you're wrong, which is admirable. You can correct yourself. But two, what I've often found is if you have deep convictions about something because it's persuasive, you really need to know that it's more persuasive than other arguments. So you need to explore them, know them, hear them, consider them. And either, like I said, you'll change, or you'll find that you'll have deeper conviction in the things that you know to be true, because the opposing arguments or perspectives were less illuminating or less persuasive, or in the language of MacIntyre, existed in a different rational discourse altogether, and so were incommensurable to the way things are. What's the way forward? Well, the way he talks about it, MacIntyre, this idea of forming communities and so on, as I understand it. But at least for me, I would say, I think he gets things so right and explains why we can't agree seemingly on anything from religion to politics to whatever else. We're so divided fundamentally. And while, our modern liberal democracy makes it feel like we have a lot of consensus and, there's votes and all this kind of stuff, realistically, almost anywhere you go, there's division strong division that cannot be resolved because we have entirely different frameworks for rational justification. I agree, and this is why, it's pretty freeing to know that, but it also means that we have work to do. I do think that probably will not argue someone into Thomistic metaphysics or Platonism, but what I can do is show the goodness of reality, why and how things have purpose, and that when they achieve them, they are fulfilled, or if you're human, you're happy, we might say. And I can model this truth, goodness, and beauty idea so that when people see it, there's something that sparks in them that and maybe inspires them to be curious as well, and to explore what it might mean to live in a new framework of knowing and perceiving and living and loving and the rest. Fortunately, MacIntyre died just a number of days ago, but I'll be forever grateful for him to introducing me to the language of virtue, that language that helped me to clarify what was already happening within me. If you enjoyed this video, watch the one above my shoulder and like and subscribe for it's nice to do so. It might even be good for you to do so, and maybe it will make me happier. Who knows?